Hello, I'm your reader Mary, here with you today, February 25th, reading the New Bedford Standard Times. Let's start with the weather. Today we'll have some variable cloudiness, a high of 50 and a low of 35. Wednesday mostly sunny, high of 53 and a low of 35. Thursday cloudy with showers around, breezy with a high of 53 and a low of 35. Friday we'll have a morning shower, mostly sunny, high of 47, low of 20. Let's check out the front page. Our first story is out of New Bedford, incredibly ambitious. $37 million Iterian renovations promise to reinvigorate a historic theater. Since closing its doors at the end of 2023, the Iterian has been undergoing a transformative renovation that promises to reinvigorate the historic theater and enrich the community. Iterian President and CEO Rosemary Gill recently shared exciting updates on the comprehensive project by taking community leaders through a tour of the construction site on Thursday, which aims to revitalize every corner of the building. We're here today to showcase the progress of our incredibly ambitious project, Gill said. I think you'll be impressed. The $37 million renovation is extensive, sparing only the back of the house while revamping everything else. The plans stretch from the auditorium and lobby areas to the behind-the-scenes infrastructure involving all the spaces within the theater's public interfaces. Gill said the historical significance and the strategic process being employed for the building updates too. Some of the things you'll see were as a result... I'm sorry, that was weird. The story just cut off, and I don't know why. Our next story, A Place of Solace, Toomey's work to shine through in new exhibitions at Seaman's Bethel. In 1830, New Bedford Port Society for the Moral Improvement of Seamen began offering church services to whalemen before they shipped out to sea. This led to the creation of the Seaman's Bethel at 15 Johnny Cake Hill, a non-denominational church that honors the memory of those fishermen lost at sea. Fred Toomey, who served as the New Bedford Port Society president for 12 years, played a key role in the renovation of both the Seaman's Bethel and the Mariners' Home, where whalemen used to stay. Now in his second year as the current president, Phil Oliveira is following Toomey's legacy by planning to add exhibits and share artifacts with the public. Some have been stored away at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. Oliveira said Toomey put a lot of himself into the care of the two buildings during his 12 years of service. He stepped down due to illness and passed away last October. Toomey was a driving force behind the renovation of the Seaman's Bethel and the Mariners' Home, which reopened May 2017. He and his best friend, Bruce Oliveira, who is Phil's brother and a board member, were honored as New Bedford Men of the Year in 2017 for their efforts spearheading the project. He, Toomey, could read the drawings under construction, and my brother was in construction his whole career. So the two of them were perfect to be in the moment. Phil Oliveira said the place was almost going to be condemned, and they brought it back, and it's beautiful now. He said Toomey, as president, was instrumental in leading the effort to raise the money, and he put his energy into the renovation along with many other people, so that piece was their calling. The Seaman's Bethel had damaged beams and was on the brink of collapse. Its renovation faced funding shortages, but the two men volunteered every day for 3 years to preserve the historic buildings that stand side by side. According to Toomey's obituary, he joined the New Bedford Port Society in 2001 and served as its president from 2012 to 2023. Quote, alongside his best friend Bruce Oliveira, they set out to restore the Bethel to its original beauty, which they accomplished with the help and financial support of so many of their friends and supporters. Not a day went by when Fred didn't visit the Bethel, either to check on its structural standing or simply to watch all the folks visiting our little piece of literary history. Phil Oliveira is in the process of setting new goals to raise awareness that the Seaman's Bethel and the Mariners' Home serve as lasting reminders of the past and present dangers of the fishing industry. This is the main reason we're here, he said. It's to keep these memories alive in perpetuity and to provide a place of solace for anyone who wants to sit and contemplate. Oliveira is excited to display some of the oldest artifacts in the future, including the original register from the 1832 that fishermen who passed through the port of New Bedford would sign. Oliveira said there are about 30 registers in the collection. Registers, he said, would include the person's name, date of entry, port, and name of the ship. He said the federal government relied on the registers to track fishermen. Family members could also use the registers to locate their loved ones. The Seamen's Bethel will once again host the New Bedford Film Festival in April, with hopes of attracting new visitors. They're also excited about the upcoming installation of the life-size statue of Herman Melville. That will adorn the grounds of the New Bedford Historic Seamen's Bethel. That is the same location where the author stopped before heading out to sea, and which was the inspiration for the Whaleman's Chapel in his literary masterpiece, Moby Dick. Oliveira said they are preparing a display featuring the 1922 silent film Down to the Sea in Ships, which featured the Seamen's Bethel. Oliveira said it's been 100 years since the Bethel appeared in film, and they hope to build an exhibit around it. Additionally, there are plans for an exhibit honoring the Bethel chaplains. What is the Seamen's Bethel? Bethel comes from two words, Hebrew words, Beth and El. Beth means house, El means God. So it's a seaman's house of God or a seaman's church. According to the website, the Seamen's Bethel was established in 1822. This iconic chapel has served as a spiritual haven for generations of mariners, offering solace and guidance to those who brave the open seas. The Bethel's storied past is interwoven with tales of whaling villages, intrepid sailors, and a deep-rooted community that has cherished its nautical traditions for nearly 2 centuries. Today, it's used for baptisms, weddings, and memorial services. What is the Mariner's Home? Well, the Mariner's Home was built in 1787 and sits adjacent to the Seamen's Bethel. According to the website, the Mariner's Home provides a welcoming refuge for sailors returning from voyages, honoring the indomitable spirit of seafarers. According to the National Park Service website, today the Mariner's Home is used as offices and exhibition space. In our final front page story, Trump's Russia U-turn upends U.S. policy. From Washington, talk about a U-turn. When Vladimir Putin's Russia invaded Ukraine 3 years ago, President Joe Biden rallied the world. The U.S. and its partners isolated Russia and poured tens of billions of dollars in arms, cash, and loans into President Volodymyr Zelensky's battered country, even as Putin refused to yield. America stands up to bullies. We stand up for freedom. This is who we are, Biden said from the White House. That was then. Now, 3 years after the Russian invasion, the Biden administration's position of, quote, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, has been tossed aside by President Donald Trump and his advisors. Trump has lashed out at Ukraine, blaming its leaders for Putin's invasion, cutting Kyiv out of early ceasefire negotiations with Russia, to the shock of America's allies. His taunting of Zelensky, whom he called a dictator, was rebuked by European leaders and peeved Ukraine's supporting lawmakers in the U.S. I'm just here to try and get peace, Trump said this month. I don't care so much about anything other than I want to stop having millions of people killed. Who started it? Trump's team says he deserves credit for shifting the conversation to how the war ends after more than a year of grim stalemate on the battlefield. But his repetition of Russian talking points about who's to blame for the war has put the White House in an uncomfortable position. At a White House briefing Thursday, Trump's national security advisor, Michael Waltz, would not say whether Trump believes Putin or Zelensky is more responsible for the Russian invasion. Waltz pointedly underscored Trump's frustration with the Ukrainian president, who said Trump was living in a disinformation bubble informed by the aggressor's narrative. There has been ongoing fighting on both sides. It's World War I-style trench warfare, Waltz said, and some of the rhetoric coming out of Kyiv, frankly, and the insults to President Trump were unacceptable. In a floor speech later that day, Senator Jeanne Shaheen, a Democrat from New Hampshire, the ranking member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, said Ukraine still has bipartisan support. Vladimir Putin is responsible for this. He's responsible for the bodies in Bucha and for thousands across Ukraine, Shaheen said, recalling the 2022 massacre of hundreds of Ukrainian townspeople by Russia's 234th Guards Air Assault Regiment. And he's got to be held accountable. We cannot let him get away with this. Stolen children. The full civilian toll isn't known. Ukraine doesn't release casualty figures and lacks access to Russian-occupied areas of the country. That's about 20% of its territory. According to the UN High Commission for Human Rights, at least 40,838 civilians have been killed or wounded in the Ukraine as of December 2024, including 2,500 children. Kyiv estimates 20,000 Ukrainian kids have been forcibly taken to Russia. The International Criminal Court has charged Putin with approving their abductions, with only a fraction returned. In addition to the Black Sea region of Crimea, which Russia seized in 2014, Moscow controls large swaths of Ukraine. In a surprise move last year, Ukraine seized territory in the western region of Kursk. Russia said last week it has retaken much of that territory and now controls 75% of the Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions of eastern Ukraine, in addition to most all of the Luhansk region. Trump sparks panic. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth alarmed U.S. allies earlier this month when he said in a speech that, quote, returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective, and that eventual NATO membership for Ukraine, a pillar of Kyiv's security strategy, is not a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Trump said later that Hegseth was probably right about NATO membership. I'm backing the Ukraine, the president told reporters. I am approving, but I do want security for our money. The comments came after a call with Putin, in which Trump said they discussed the greater benefit that we will someday have in working together, and raised an in-person meeting in Saudi Arabia. The call was the first known conversation between a U.S. president and Putin since the war began. His team then traveled to Riyadh to meet with Russian officials, including Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who is under U.S. sanctions. Secretary of State Marco Rubio touted the incredible opportunities that exist to partner with the Russians geopolitically, on issues of common interest, and frankly, economically. The talks incensed Ukraine. Zelensky proposed a postponement of a trip of his own to Saudi Arabia that was due to follow. We want no one to decide anything behind our backs, he said. No decision can be made without Ukraine on how to end a war in Ukraine. Sour relations. Trump's complicated history with Zelensky dates back to an infamous 2019 phone call the leaders shared 2 months after the former comedian was sworn in as Ukraine's president. From the White House, Trump asked Zelensky to investigate Biden, then Trump's top rival for the presidency, his son Hunter, who had served on the board of a Ukrainian energy company, and a discredited conspiracy theory involving a hack on the DNC during the 2016 election that the U.S. prosecutors say was done by Russian agents. The phone call led to Trump's first impeachment trial. He was accused by House Democrats of withholding military aid to Ukraine and dangling a White House visit in front of Zelensky in a quid pro quo, a charge he denied. Trump eventually provided Ukraine with weapons. He was acquitted by the Republican-controlled Senate in February of 2020, and Zelensky did not visit the White House until after Biden took office. And being at the midpoint, we would normally do obituaries. Today, we just have one death notice for Maureen A. Keenan, age 97, from New Bedford, passed away on February 21st. Arrangements are made through the Saunders-Doyer Home for Funerals. Service time is February 26th at 10 a.m. at St. Lawrence Church. And now let's return to the inside of the paper. Massachusetts officials order gas utility companies to lower their bills. Officials from the Mass Department of Public Utilities have ordered gas utility companies to lower customer bills after many reported skyrocketing rates this year. In a letter Tuesday, the department's commissioners ordered the state's 5 gas utilities to lower customer bills by at least 5% for March and April. The department said customer bills have reached, quote, unsustainable levels and attributed the high rates to, quote, increased supply costs, the recovery of unusually high programmatic costs through delivery charges, and a cold winter. Several Massachusetts politicians, including Governor Maura Healey, called on the DPU to lower rates in recent weeks. How much will gas bills go down, and will Mass customers be affected? According to the DPU's letter, the state's 5 gas utility companies are being ordered to lower customer bills by at least 5% across the rest of the peak utility season. The letter is addressed to the following companies, so it will affect their customers: Berkshire Gas, Eversource, Liberty Utilities, National Grid, Unitil. When will the gas bills go down? The 5% cut will apply to the rest of the peak heating season, excluding February. That means it will be in effect for March and April. Why are gas bills so expensive in Mass? Well, according to the letter to the DPW signed by more than 20 lawmakers last week, Eversource, one of the state's largest providers, attributed the increased rates to colder temperatures, increased usage, rate adjustments that were implemented in November of 2024. The letter said some constituents have reported as much as 27% of an increase in their bills this season. A story from Reuters: FDA faces lawsuit over weight loss drugs taken off the shortage list. Drug compounders sued the Food and Drug Administration on Monday over its decision to remove Novo Nordisk's weight loss and diabetes treatments, Wegovy and Ozempic, from its shortage list. That's a move that will sharply curtail the ability of the compounders to sell cheaper versions of the medicines. The lawsuit, filed in Fort Worth, Texas, in federal court by the Outsourcing Facilities Association, that's a compounding industry group and a Texas-based compounding pharmacy operator, claims the FDA's finding that there was no longer a shortage of the drugs and the active ingredient, semaglutide, was arbitrary and capricious. The FDA declined to comment on the lawsuit. The Outsourcing Facilities Association and Pharmacia Custom Compounding filed a similar lawsuit against the agency last year over its removal of tirzepatide, the active ingredient in Eli Lilly's rival weight loss and diabetes drugs Zepbound and Mounjaro, from the shortage list. Regulations allow compounding pharmacies to manufacture and sell large quantities of brand-name medicines only if they are in short supply. Americans who cannot afford Wegovy or have struggled to find it have been turning to cheaper versions sold by compounding pharmacies and telehealth providers like Hims and Hers and Weight Watchers. Wegovy has been shown to help patients lose as much as 15% of their weight on average. Hims and Hers had been selling compounders' copies for far less than Novo's and Wegovy and had a ready supply. Hims and Hers, in a regulatory filing, said while it believes that there are paths to continue offering access to certain compounded GLP-1s after the shortage ends, it, quote, cannot guarantee that we will continue to be able to offer these products in the same manner, to the same extent, or at all, due to a variety of factors. The Outsourcing Facilities Association and Pharmacia allege in both lawsuits that a shortage of the drugs persists and that the FDA wrongly trusted the manufacturer's claim that they could meet demand without considering evidence that patients were still having trouble accessing the medicines. The FDA in October 2024 agreed to reconsider its decision about tirzepatide in response to the lawsuit, but in December said its conclusion remained the same. In lifting the shortage for both drugs, the FDA said compounders would have a 60 to 90-day grace period before they would face enforcement. Out of Washington, D.C., Supreme Court rebuffs challenge to abortion clinic buffer zones. The U.S. Supreme Court declined on Monday to hear a challenge to the legality of buffer zones used to protect access to abortion clinics and limit harassment of patients in a challenge brought by anti-abortion activists who have argued that their free speech rights were being violated. The justices turned away appeals by self-described, quote, sidewalk counselors in New Jersey and Illinois of lower court decisions to throw out their lawsuits that claim that buffer zones violate free speech protections under the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. The activists had been asking the Supreme Court to overturn its 2000 ruling, a Colorado buffer zone law. The conservative justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito said they would have taken up the appeals. The legality of so-called buffer zones that create a perimeter around abortion facilities, or floating zones, that put distance between demonstrators and a clinic's patients or staff, has been legally contested for decades. The issue pits free speech rights against concerns over harassment and violence by anti-abortion protesters. The Supreme Court has a 6-3 conservative majority. In 2022, the court overturned 1973 Roe v. Wade, a ruling that had legalized abortion nationwide and ended its recognition of a woman's constitutional right to terminate her pregnancy. Since that ruling, the issue of buffer zones has regained prominence. While numerous GOP-led states have banned or severely restricted abortion, some municipalities in states where it remains legal have adopted buffer zone ordinances to limit intimidation, harassment, and drawing legal challenges. In Carbondale, Illinois, a group called Coalition Life that organizes sidewalk counselors sued after the local city council passed such an ordinance in 2023. The measure established a floating 8-foot buffer that prevents people from approaching people without their permission in the vicinity of healthcare facilities. That was in response to increased threats, disorderly acts at abortion clinics, and the ordinance has since been repealed. It had been modeled after a nearly identical Colorado law that the Supreme Court upheld in 2000 in a case called Hill v. Colorado. The Chicago-based Seventh Circuit of Appeals dismissed the coalition's case in March 2024, noting that the challenges cannot prevail so long as the Hill ruling remains in place. Thomas, in his dissent on Monday, criticized the court's Hill decision and expressed regret that the justices had declined, quote, an invitation to set the record straight on Hill's defunct status. I would have taken this opportunity to explicitly overrule Hill, Thomas added. The coalition's lawyers had asked the Supreme Court to overrule the Hill ruling because in places where anti-abortion views are disfavored, buffer zones are a ready tool to silence those who advance them, and to do so precisely when and where their speech may matter most. In New Jersey, a sidewalk counselor named Jerry Turco sued the city of Englewood for adopting a 2014 ordinance that created an 8-foot buffer zone protecting the entrances and driveways of healthcare facilities. The buffer was set after reports of people associated with an evangelical Christian ministry engaging in aggressive and hostile protests outside Metropolitan Medical Associates, a local abortion clinic. Turco was not associated with that ministry, and she said she delivered only peaceful counseling. The Philadelphia-based Third Circuit Court of Appeals threw out Turco's complaint in January 2024, saying a buffer zone can help protect an individual's health, safety, and access to pregnancy-related services, and, quote, does not place a substantial burden on Turco's speech. The Third Circuit said its ruling was in line with the Hill precedent. Alexis McGill Johnson, president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation, said after the Supreme Court acted on Monday that buffer zones, quote, help to create a safer environment for patients, providers, and staff. No patient should have to encounter threats, intimidation, and attacks while seeking health care, and no medical provider or health center staff should be threatened because of their work to deliver abortion care to patients in need. Workers told to ignore email. Some federal agencies ask for voluntary responses. The agency that oversees federal workers said on Monday that they could ignore weekend email from tech billionaire Elon Musk that required them to justify their jobs after his demands sparked unusual pushback from some agencies. Musk's email had directed each of the nation's 2.3 million civil service workers to provide a 5-point summary of their work by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time Monday, raising questions about how much authority the world's richest person can wield in President Donald Trump's effort to downsize the U.S. government. Musk had warned that workers who did not respond in detail could lose their jobs. But as the deadline approached, Musk seemed to acknowledge that his plan had run aground. The email request was utterly trivial, as the standard for passing the test was to type some words and press send! That was a post from Musk on X, the social media site he owns. He went on to say yet so many failed, even that inane test, urged on in some cases by their managers. According to an internal Justice Department email seen by Reuters, the Office of Personnel Management told human resources officials at federal agencies on Monday that employees would not be let go for not replying to Musk's email, nor were staff required to respond to it. The memo said responding to the email was voluntary, and it also urged employees not to share confidential, sensitive, or classified information in their responses. That was a concern of critics of Musk's action. Even after that guidance was issued, some agencies nudged their employees to respond. A senior manager at the General Services Administration, which manages federal buildings, told employees that the agency was still encouraging workers to answer the email even if it was voluntary. Similarly, the acting director of OPM itself sent an email to the agency's staff that said responding with bullet points was voluntary but strongly encouraged. The White House and OPM did not respond to requests for comment. The countermanding of Musk's order by some agency leaders was the first sign of internal resistance to his blunt force approach to downsizing the federal government. The Department of Health and Human Services advised employees that if they chose to reply, they should keep their responses general in nature, and they should refrain from identifying specific drugs or contracts they're working on, according to the email reviewed by Reuters. Assume that what you will write will be read by malign foreign actors, and that if you choose to reply, keep your response general in nature. Musk's downsizing initiative rippled into the wider U.S. economy as well, forcing companies that do business with the government to lay off their own workers and defer payments to vendors. The billionaire's Saturday message took some administration officials by surprise. That's according to two sources familiar with the situation. Adding to the confusion, Trump stood by Musk. "I thought it was great," he told reporters at a White House meeting earlier on Monday. "There was a lot of genius in sending it. We're trying to find out if people were working." In other Monday action, a federal judge blocked the government downsizing team created by Trump and led by Musk from accessing sensitive data maintained by the Education Department and the OPM. Also on Monday, a group of labor unions that have asked the federal judge to stop the mass firings updated their lawsuit to request that Musk's email be ruled illegal. Prior to the OPM directive, senior officials at Justice, as well as the Department of Defense, State and Homeland Security, and several other agencies had told workers not to respond outside their established chain of command. The Transportation Department, the Treasury Department, and independent agencies like the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Communications Commission have told employees to answer Musk's message. Musk has reveled in the upheaval, even wielding a chainsaw at a conservative political conference. His email was also sent to political appointees at the White House who presumably would not be viewed with suspicion by the president, according to two sources. It was also sent to federal judges and other employees of the court system, who make up a separate branch of government and do not answer to the administration. More than 20,000 workers have been laid off as part of the downsizing effort. The confusion echoed the broader turmoil surrounding Trump's return to power. Since taking office on January 20th, Trump has frozen billions of dollars in foreign assistance and effectively dismantled the U.S. Agency for International Development, stranding medicine and food in warehouses. This has been the New Bedford Standard Times. Today I'm your reader, Mary, wishing you good health and a great week, and we'll talk again next week.